but it's okay. But go ahead and, but you look great. So I would
Okay,
just
that's
say
good.
go for it.
All right. Well, thank you, everyone. Really appreciate.
Oh, that's
Really
better. Look,
appreciate.
we can see it's getting better. So just go for it.
All right. Well, thank you, everyone, for inviting me here. It's so good to be back in the metaverse. I'm here in Washington, D.C. at the 500 Global Up Next Summit, talking about the future of venture capital. And I'm super pumped and excited about everything that's happening in the world right now. Well, not everything, but about the many positive developments we have happening in the world right now. So I thought I would, just give some quick remarks and then open it up to questions, because I think it's far more interesting for people to have a chance to ask questions than it is for me to just go on and on and on. So I will be watching the chat, and folks can go ahead and ask questions at any time. But I'm going to talk a little bit about why I'm so excited about the world right now. So, the reason I'm so excited is we are on the verge of so much progress. Every once in a while, we have new technologies that come through that are able to transform our world. And we last had such a major transformation with the rise of the internet in the 1990s. And I think we're on the verge of something that may be even bigger than that with AI. And artificial intelligence isn't just, incredibly powerful on its own. It's incredibly powerful because it's building on the waves that came before us. Thanks to the internet, we are all connected together. Thanks to mobile, computing is ubiquitous and continuous and with us wherever we go. And it's because of those previous revolutions that this AI revolution will be so remarkable, because we will have AI with us, connecting us all everywhere we go. So, why is it that artificial intelligence is so interesting? Well, it's important to remember the principles of blitzscaling, which is, of course, the book that I wrote with my friend Reid Hoffman. Blitzscaling says that we live in a world where more and more markets are winner take most, where more and more the right strategy is to win the market by prioritizing speed above everything else in order to achieve that market leadership and achieve that incredible wealth and growth creation. But the other reason to blitzscale is simply to go faster. The world has so many issues, the world has so many things we're struggling with. And we need to come together to blitzscale towards the future in order to get to a better future more quickly, so that more people can be helped and more people can be able to uh, improve their lives. I'm going to check. Troy says he can't hear anyone. Can anyone hear me? What I'm trying to do is I'm trying to switch to current zone. Is current zone okay? I can also go back to main presentation zone, either way. All right, good. I'll continue. So, in terms of blitzscaling, the reason why we need blitzscaling is to blitzscale towards a greater AI future. So, let's talk about what artificial intelligence is, what it's going to mean for us, and how we're going to be able to do. And it sounds like refreshing helps. If for any reason my audio goes out, you'll have to refresh. We are living in the beta version of the future, as you know, so few technical difficulties are to be expected. So the reason artificial intelligence is so important right now is because it represents the equivalent of the Industrial Revolution. If you go back into your history books and think about the Industrial Revolution, it took place in the 18th century. Until then, if you were to chart out global per capita GDP, it would be a chart that looked like this, essentially flat for all of human existence. Yeah, I'm sure it would start to go up when we had fire and agriculture and things like that. But things like the Roman Empire, the Black Death, the fall of a dynasty in China, these barely even register in terms of overall changes to global GDP, per capita GDP. But if you look at the graph starting in 1750, the Industrial Revolution did something almost everything in the world around you had to be accomplished with muscle power. So take knitting a wool sweater. So you think of a wool sweater, you think of something you could buy at the Gap for $10, $20. But what it would actually take to make a wool sweater is truly different. In the old days, you would have a farmer raising sheep on a farm. By the way, thank you for those people who are letting me know if things get jittery or something like that. That is very helpful. Please keep doing that in the chat. And fortunately, I am able to see myself on the screen, and so I can tell when I'm freezing. But any reminders, any feedback is super helpful. So imagine a farmer raising a flock of sheep. There's a shepherd in the field tending those sheep hour after hour. When the time came in the springtime, the shepherd would drive the flock back to the farmhouse, and then human beings would come out with scissors and cut the wool, shear the wool off the sheep. Then other people would come in and take that pile of wool and pick out all the sticks and pick out all the burrs and wash the wool as well to get rid of all the dirt. And then they would take that wool after it dried and by hand spin it into thread. They would take that thread and knit it together into a sweater. Now think about all the hours of labor that went into making that one sweater. That's why in those days, people had like one set of clothes that they would wear all the time. But the Industrial Revolution changed all that with spinning wheels, power looms, and all of a sudden, the productivity of that industry dramatically increased. I looked at a study that was done of the British textile industry during industrialization, and the labor factor productivity, i.e., the amount of clothing you could produce per given amount of human labor, increased by a factor of 40. So not 40% better, but 4,000% better. That is a over order of magnitude effect, and the impact of that was remarkable. So this is an important point about things like artificial intelligence that dramatically lower costs or increase productivity. One thing you might see is, well, gosh, we can make clothes 40 times faster. I guess we're not going to have to spend that much time on making clothes anymore. That's one possibility. But the other possibility is if the demand curve is elastic. In other words, if as the price goes down, the amount of the good or service demanded goes up. And that's precisely what happened. When the cost of textiles dropped, all of a sudden people wanted more clothes. It turns out people did not like wearing one outfit every single day of their lives. They wanted clean clothes to wear. They wanted to take baths. They wanted to actually live a more pleasant life. And that may not show up in terms of things like, overall population, but it sure as heck shows up in the quality of life. So that is what the Industrial Revolution did for us. It created 10x, 50x, 100x increases in productivity in many different areas, allowing us to create an industrial civilization, one which then resulted today in vastly higher GDP, vastly higher life expectancy, vastly higher quality of life. And that's amazing. And that is what AI might be able to do for us. Because like the Industrial Revolution, AI is going to allow us to amplify and replace. But instead of amplifying and replacing muscle power with mechanical power, the AI revolution, especially generative AI and the current crop of large language models, for the first time allow us to replace or amplify human brain power, cognition, with computing power. Now, we've always been able to augment our brains with computing. The abacus, for example, is a way of doing math more quickly. A calculator is something that absolutely helps us do math. And then the spreadsheet is even more so, because it takes something that could be tediously done via calculator and does it instantaneously. That's incredible. But those are highly structured ways of dealing with data. And most of the data in the world is not like that. It's imperfect. Think about all the times during the day when you're doing your work, when you're going about your daily life, when you have to take in data from imperfect sources that's not particularly well structured, make sense of it, and make decisions. That's something that only human beings could do until now. That vast quantity of unstructured data is now something that artificial intelligence allows computing power to be deployed against. And that could, just like the Industrial Revolution, create massive increases in productivity. I'll give you an example from my own life. Most of you know me as the co-author of Blitzscaling. Scaling is a book that my friend Reid Hoffman and I began working on in early 2015. And it was published on October 18th of 2018, 3.5 years later. Another book that we worked on together that Reid published earlier this year is Impromptu, which is Reid's book about the future of AI and humanity. That book was published on March 15th of this year. We started working on that book on February 1st of this year. It's a book that was written in conjunction with, and perhaps even primarily, by GPT-4. 70% of the words in Impromptu were created by GPT-4, with 30% created by human beings. And we were able to complete that book, start it February 1st, and release it to the public March 15th, which meant it took 30 days to write the book. It took 15 days to lay it out and produce the paper copies so that they could be in bookstores and distributed to folks. That's really close to that 40-to-1 ratio, from 36 months of 3 years plus another 6, so 42 months, to a single month. We're the first to write a book with GPT-4, but I know we're not going to be the last. And every single day, people are out there trying to figure out how they can use AI to make their lives better. The vision I have for AI is this. I've had the good fortune to spend time with people who are billionaires, who have the kinds of resources that most of us can only dream about. Tim can absolutely have those resources, but most of us can only dream about being a billionaire. And you may say to yourself, wow, it must be great to be a billionaire. The mansions, the private jets, those things are absolutely nice. And believe me, I would love to have a mansion and a private jet, especially since I travel around quite a bit. But what people really fail to appreciate as one of the huge, huge benefits of being a billionaire is the fact that if you are a billionaire and you set up your life correctly, you can have a smart, capable person working continuously to remove all of the friction from your life. That's something that you can only do because you are a billionaire and you can afford to pay a personal assistant and a chief of staff and all these other folks. But I would suggest that artificial intelligence, its next stage, as we start to get into autonomous agents, will give that power to all of us. If I want to book a flight to Washington, D.C., AI agent will know I don't fly early. It will know I only want to take nonstop flights. It will know which frequent flyer programs I belong to, and it will know when my calendar says I need to be in that city. Now, that could be done by a human executive assistant, but that would cost a lot of money to have someone work with me full time and have that ability. And even then, I wouldn't want to call up my personal assistant at 2 a.m., wake him or her up, and get them working on this. But with AI, it can all be done for us. That is why AI is so transformative. You couldn't do this with traditional computing, but with AI, you can. Now, what does this imply for the future? Well, if we look at the Industrial Revolution, I told you about the upside portion of it, which is to say the fact that productivity dramatically increased, GDP dramatically increased, quality of life dramatically increased. But it wasn't all smooth sailing. So one of the things you could do is if you look at that chart of GDP rising, the other thing that looks almost exactly like that chart is the chart of global CO2 emissions. Because that mechanical power, that came from burning fossil fuels for the most part. And even today, the power that goes into our data centers, that powers the large language models, training regimens, and the ones being run, powers ChatGPT. That is electricity that is generally generated by burning fossil fuels. Now, we are seeing more and more renewables. And one of the reasons why Sam Altman has invested in nuclear fusion is because he believes it will be necessary for the future of AI. But the fact remains that carbon emissions have become a problem for all of us. Other problems occurred as well. If you look at life in the United Kingdom at that time, for decades, expectancy actually declined. That's thanks to pollution, crowding, resulting disease. The quality of life actually declined even as GDP began to rise. And that's because the net effects of the Industrial Revolution, the fallout, was not something that people were prepared for. And so when pollution started, there were no regulations to worry about pollution. When people lost jobs and starved, there was no safety net to help them out because we lived at that point in a world which is designed around small farms. And so it took time for the world to adjust to the Industrial Revolution. And even though the result in the end was very good, there was a transition period where things got worse. But that happened because people didn't realize the magnitude of the change. I hope that we can be wiser today, that we can say with great certainty that AI is going to have these massive effects on the world. I think I saw somewhere that 80% of jobs could potentially be replaced by AI. That's the big concern that many people have. Certainly, there will be entire classes, entire industries that will be hollowed out by AI. I've said multiple times that if you look at an industry which deals primarily with text, which has a very inelastic demand curve. In other words, if the prices go down, you don't have a greater demand for goods and services. Any industry like that is going to suffer greatly. And a great example of this would be the legal industry. If the costs of lawyers declines by 90% because productivity of lawyers increases by 10x, do you want to buy more law? I would argue the answer is no. There's an inelastic demand. You need a lawyer when you need a lawyer. And when you need a lawyer, you're generally going to pay that lawyer. And so, yeah, on the margins, there may be some folks who are disadvantaged, who will have more access to the law. That's a great thing. But as a whole, the legal industry is going to be much smaller than it was before AI. And those lawyers are going to have to find something to do. Otherwise, they're going to spend all their time suing AI companies and AI investors. And I certainly don't want that to happen. So we would be better off thinking about how we can actually deal with these changes, adapt to these changes. Some of these will involve government policy. You've heard a lot about AI regulation, but I think the bigger factor will ultimately be, how do you tax artificial intelligence in a way that can pay for retraining, social services, and the like? The good news there is that AI will not only render some jobs obsolete, AI will make it easier and easier to reskill people to new jobs. Why is it so hard to teach people, to train people? It's because our methods are so terrible. Putting people into a room, or even having them watch an instructor over Zoom, is a terrible way for people to learn. Somebody's trying to learn new skills if they're in the metaverse, they have an AI tutor working one-on-one with them, delivering personalized instruction, instantaneous feedback, helping them change their overarching set of skills. I heard just today, or maybe it was yesterday, it all runs together, that Amazon has got a whole program that is retraining warehouse workers that are being replaced by automation to handle entry-level programming, coding, data science jobs. Most people probably think, wow, an Amazon worker, what do they know? Well, guess what? Those people have brains just like the rest of us. And with AI amplifying those brains, with AI helping them actually learn these new skills, I think there's tremendous things that can happen as a result of it. So I would say that to summarize my overall view of AI, I think there is tremendous promise in artificial intelligence. I think it's going to be the biggest wave that has ever hit. It's one of the reasons why I'm investing in artificial intelligence, as are so many other investors. But I think that it is something that people need to embrace and adapt to. It's something that people need to be able to bring into their lives. And what you can do in order to really embrace and adapt to AI is pretty simple. Start using it, because I rest assured the younger generation already is. Somebody made this great observation. Over the summer, the traffic to the ChatGPT website declined for the first time. So over the summer, we saw, whoa, what's going on? Are people no longer using ChatGPT? What is happening? It turns out students were home for the summer. They didn't have homework assignments. And once we got into September and people went back to school, that ChatGPT traffic shot right back up. Because every child, unless there is a rule against it, and generally even if there is turning to ChatGPT or some other platform in order to help them do their work. And that's a good thing, because they're getting practice on one of the most important skills that we'll have moving forward, which is figuring out how to leverage this technology. Historically, we've loved the idea of hard work, right? People want to work hard. I like working hard. I think it's an important part of it. But if AI is going to multiply our productivity 10x, 40x, 100x, then actually the better use of our time is not working twice as many hours, probably not getting twice as much productivity. It's taking that time and figuring out how we can better leverage AI. So instead of getting 20x productivity, 100x productivity. And the people who are early adopters, like the people who are part of the Singularity community, best position to really take advantage of this revolution. So I will leave it at that, because I'm slightly worried that I'm not seeing the chat messages and that I've been completely incomprehensible. Resolved IP issues with LLM augmented authorship that concern you. And the answer is yes and no. So yes, there are significant in general. And go ahead, please feel free to interrupt either by voice or on that. And as long as I continue to see my lips move on the video, I'll assume that things are coming through. So I was answering Otto's question and saying that, yes, there are absolutely unresolved IP issues with LLMs. And that's because they're essentially a black box. I tell people who have a hard time understanding this that a large language model, in some ways, is like a human being. It's not sentient. But if you think about it, all of us are essentially large language models. We have processed all this information in our lifetimes, and we didn't store it all away. Right? We learned habits, rules of thumb, patterns, and these are the things that we then deploy if someone asks us a question. So in a very real sense, whenever you answer a question that somebody asks you and you don't go first and look stuff up, you're behaving like an LLM. Like it's just a yay GPT, as some people have joked. And when you give that answer, you may not remember all the places you got that information from. Because when you stored that information away, you didn't say, remember that this pattern I saw came from this particular book that I read, or this particular lecture that I attend. It's hard to trace the evidence of the pattern matching that comes out of it. So that is the biggest deal, right? From an IP perspective, it's all impossible, literally impossible, based on how the technology works, to figure that out. And so I suspect that the answer is going to have to be some sort of policy. Then proportionally, you're going to have to assign some kind of economic interest to the people who produce that. And you can get around that with going after things that are in the public domain. And I suspect that that will probably be what a lot of folks do. But the things that are not in the public domain, which are generally things that are more current, are going to require tapping into things. And it will be possible to know what proportion of the input it represents. I think that the other element of it is what happens when people are using LLMs to then author things. Take the book Impromptu, for example. Can you copyright work from an LLM? I think the answer is yes, because you came up with a query that maybe nobody else ran. All right. What happens if you start to have people who are working for hire, editors, not writers? So if you notice in the publishing industry, there's somebody like me who is an author who works on the book, and I have an economic interest in the book. And then there are people who are the editors. And the editors work for the publisher. And after I turn in a manuscript, they make suggestions. They may even make changes themselves. Those editors have no economic interest in my book. They're paid by the publisher to do this. And so this is something that will happen on down the line. We'll have to decide, hey, are people who are being paid to work with LLM output to fine tune it and work it over, do they have any economic interest? And what I would say is, according to the model that already exists, they don't necessarily have to, as long as they're sufficiently compensated for their work. And the real wrinkle is, can the LLM learn from that human editor and then use that later on? The answer, I think, is that human editor needs to negotiate up front. At the end of the day, we cannot protect everyone from everything. We need people to act as self-interested beings, and we need them to negotiate on their own behalf in order to make it work. Just broadly speaking, when people say, oh, I'm so worried about AI and intellectual property and copying, I'm like, well, you must be terrified of Xerox machines, because those can absolutely copy things right now. So I don't think we necessarily need radically new forms of intellectual property in the AI era. We just need to figure out how current laws apply. And now I see a note from Troy. Troy always says, always great to hear your talks. Troy, it's always great to see you. It's a pleasure. Where do you see AI in 3 years, 5 years, 10 years? And what has to happen to get there? So in the next 3 years, the big thing that will happen is we're going to figure out how to actually integrate AI into our lives. And here's what I mean. Right now, the user interface that we have for AI is the chat window. It's a powerful interface. It's something that we've all been trained to use and we all use on a daily basis. There's no way that it is the perfect way to interact, like treating AI like a genie that we send prompts to. AI is going to be embedded into our workflows in ways that are far more seamless than they are today. And I think that the next 3 years are going to be a process of figuring out how to make AI more seamless in our lives, instead of it being something that we call out and go to a specific separate place to go. We already see this happening with Microsoft and every other big company incorporating AI into their products, but I expect this to progress even further. The other thing that I expect to see happen in the next 3 years with AI is I believe that we are going to find new business models. One of the principles of blitzscaling is that technological innovation leads to business model innovation, which then requires management innovation. So the technological innovation of artificial intelligence will lead to new business models. When the internet came out, if you had asked people at that time, who do you think is best suited for this new medium? Who is going to dominate? You would probably say, well, phone books, because it's a great place to look people up, magazines and newspapers, because it's all about reading content. And those would be the big winners. So we look around today, where are the phone book companies? Where are the newspapers and the magazines? They are not the big winners, because the true business models that really dominated the internet had not yet emerged. We had e-commerce through Amazon, which many people scoffed at because they said, how will people ever trust putting their credit card information on the internet? How will people ever trust buying not from a human being, but from a website? We had search through Google and search engine marketing and advertising. And we had eBay and PayPal, eBay being a classic, another form of e-commerce, creating the ability to have peer-to-peer, person-to-person commerce, and PayPal, person-to-person payments. And so all of these things were business models that didn't exist. There was no offline equivalent of eBay other than a swap meet, which is not even comparable. There was no offline equivalent to PayPal, like Western Union. Come on. These were new business models that were enabled by the new technology, and they came to dominate that subsequent era. Same holds true for the mobile era. If we look at the Web 2.0 era, the Web 2.0 era, social networks didn't exist before. The mobile era, location-based services like Uber didn't exist before. These are all things that are enabled by the new technology. And we're going to see new business models, AI-enabled business models, emerge in the next 3 years that we may not even recognize as business models today. Out further in the future, looking 5 years, 10 years down the line, the change is going to be in the technology, but the change will also be in us. We saw much more innovation coming out once we started to have people who are digital natives producing products, starting companies. And we'll see the same effect as AI natives begin to produce products and start companies. It's too late for me. I can never be AI native. I am not technically digitally native, but because I started using computers at an early age, I think I've managed to hold on pretty well. But even my children are not AI native, right? It's the kids who are alive today, the 8-year-olds and 6-year-olds, that are going to be the first true AI natives. And by the way, those 8-year-olds in 10 years will be 18, will be at college, or maybe even starting companies. So I think that those are some of the things that are going to happen in the next few years. It's super exciting. There is always the concern. I mentioned the fallout of the Industrial Revolution and the need for us to establish policies that will help people adjust and adapt. But I am very optimistic about the future. I think the best is yet to come. So other questions that folks may have, please feel free to ask anything you like. Valentina asks, Chris, how do you foresee the convergence of AI and automation reshaping the foundational pillars of startup ecosystems? And what unique challenges and opportunities might this present for budding entrepreneurs in the next decade? So there is a very interesting thing that I heard recently that I haven't fully thought through, but I'm going to share it with you guys because I think it's so important. So the fundamental unit of our lives today, the internet world, is the web page. Again, you could call it the app page, the app screen, whatever, but it's the page or the screen that the human being interacts with. Now, I go to Google Flights and I do a set of searches. And once I figure out that search I get, and I add that trip to my calendar, so I have that there, and I save the receipt to a folder so I can submit it for reimbursement or tax write-off or all these different things. And I do that by interacting with the screen. In the future, our AI agents will be doing most of that. Instead of this world of human readable websites, we're going to be heading into a world where the most important points of coming together are going to be APIs, machine readable interfaces, things that are designed for AI to be able to find and interact with, as opposed to human beings. There's a tremendous opportunity in this dramatic shift. So I think that that is going to be huge. I think the other thing that is absolutely true is that it's going to become easier and easier to get to a critical mass of things. And here's what I mean. With AI amplifying human productivity and being able to provide skills that you don't personally have, it'll be easier than ever before to get to the point where you have a minimum viable product or actually have customers or actually serving the market. And that's actually going to be a good thing. If we think back to the beginning of my career, the 1990s, I know I've been around a long time. If I think back to the beginning of my career, if you wanted to build a company, you put together a PowerPoint presentation and you took it around Sand Hill Road and you tried to get them to give you a couple of $1 million so that you could build a prototype and get it to the market. Back then, you needed to. My very first company, data center space, was $20,000 a month. We had to buy servers from Sun Microsystems that would cost thousands and thousands of dollars. To tend the space in the data center, the co-location facility, we had to hire staff that would watch over it. That again cost tens of thousands of dollars per month. So we needed millions of dollars in order to get a very basic web application up and running. And then what happened? Well, we had things like Amazon Web Services eventually. Even before then, we had all these essentially will be even better. Now, there will be challenges standing out from the crowd. How do you make sure that I don't have data on the carbon footprint of the sandwich? All I have is a gross estimate and the fact that it's like, okay, I'm looking at a pastrami sandwich. Let me eat it. In the future, if blockchain can bring in all that information, our AI will be able to analyze it and tell us whether or not this is the right thing to order. And you can imagine, let's say we're 5 years down the line. I'm walking through the airport, not yet being carried by a robot, sadly, because robotics are lagging artificial intelligence, but I'm walking through the airport with my augmented reality glasses on. And I feel like my stomach rumbles. Or maybe based on my wearable, my AI agent realizes that I'm feeling hungry and says, hey, we looked around this airport and we believe that here are the best 3 options for you. These restaurants, these dishes, because we already know from pinging their AI visible websites or whatever you want to call them, that this is what they have on their menu. These are their prices. These are the deals of the day. And we know based on your own habits, these are the things you like to eat. Now, that I think is something that we could all use. And again, it's like having a human professional with us at all times, like a professional athlete has a personal chef and a nutritionist helping them be optimized. high quality artificial intelligence tutor that will be personalized, that will give immediate feedback, that will help them. That's one of the things I love, the idea of human capital formation. All of a sudden, the advantage of being wealthy is reduced because everyone gets a great education. So that's one of the things I think will help. But overall, I think it's going to be necessary to figure out how to tax artificial intelligence and to make sure that we redistribute some of the immense amount of wealth that's going to create broadly so that everyone benefits from it. So I think I have time maybe for one last question. That way, other conference that I'm supposed to be at that I broke away from because, again, the Singularity community is important to me. Greg is important to me, and I'm so glad to be here with you today. So if you guys have one last question, I'm happy to answer it, and then I will have to sadly take my leave. And if there isn't a specific question, that's okay too. It has been a great privilege to be here with you guys today. I noticed that the technology seems to improve a little bit as it is. But in be here, and Greg, I will turn things back over to
Okay.
you.
Thanks, Chris. Really appreciate you doing this talk again. Um,